Hello, universe. Today we are going to be talking about qualified immunity and the Minneapolis Police Department being disbanded. Here I am with Nolan. I'm really excited to actually have your presence here. Would you like to go ahead and describe a little bit about what your career goals are and where you are headed and why your perspective matters on a topic like this?
Sure. I'll start with, I like to try and start some of these things by going over my identity and background a little bit first. Learn the hard way. If you don't do that yourself, other people will do it for you.
Oh,
for
yes.
better, for worse. There's a lot of identities that I think, are important to my life and who I am. Things ranging from being a dog owner. I lived overseas very much as an immigrant, very much in like another culture's, or within another culture, very much. I also grew up had a very unique upbringing of all places in Jackson, Mississippi. I grew up between white and black culture there, and a very weird byproduct of both integration and like white flight in Mississippi. Had those experiences, went to college and tried to start a medical career, which, I thankfully didn't get into and didn't want to get into ultimately. But also during my college years tried to, thankfully I failed, but I tried to fit in with like the rich southern white crowd, so to speak, and that had that experience as well. And then after all that, went overseas and was a teacher in South Korea. That's where I was an immigrant over there and had very much an immigrant experience in Asia and have a lot of perspective from that. And then it was during that time of pursuing an international education career that I, for a lot of different reasons, I have decided to devote my life. I mean, the purpose, I think, of my career is to protect people's lives and human rights. Especially the most vulnerable, black lives being of that, immigrant, queer lives. There's lots of vulnerable people in this world, and I looked at my career in education, and specifically international education, and I felt underutilized and misutilized in that. I was a good teacher. I loved teaching. Didn't like parents so much.
But here as it goes.
Yeah, and that I was starting that education career around the beginnings of what we now see as like the modern, evidence of problems with police. So a lot of like the videos that we're all talking about and that are sparking all this, conversations and unrest and, politics and whatnot, those really started like in the early 2010s, like 2013, 2014, 2015. And that's, I was in Korea starting that education career in 2014. Like, for some perspective and context, Sandra Bland was in 2015. Oh, now I'm going to get all the dates wrong. Michael Brown, I think, was the year before, and Eric Gardner was in 2016. So give you a little timeline there. And I was in grad school and working on that career and just was kind of miserable doing it, and also was seeing all these things that I care about. It's weird for people to start, for me, it's weird for people to start, to become trendy, for people to say Black Lives Matter and all, that kind of, necessary stuff to say. But for me, because I grew up with the background that I have, Black lives have always mattered. And even before, this most recent event, for the last 3 years, I've been devoting, all of my spare time to trying to do that. And so starting around 2017 is when I started trying to get out, finish the contracts that I had with my schools and do the research and get back to the U.S. And since I've been back the last 2 years, I've been spending, to say it's been a passion of mine is probably understating it. To ultimately get into a law enforcement agency.
Completely. And your heart, like, is really in a good place. Like, just for a little bit of context, I met Nolan while we were working at Amnesty International. And for those who are not familiar, that is actually a human rights organization. International, they work hand in hand with UNICEF and the WHO and United Nations quite often. So they are really, really in it. So in a sense, we were lobbyers on the behalf of Amnesty International and had to speak about genocide, immigration, police brutality, like anything that would be really brought up by certain demographics. Any concern that was brought to our attention, we had something that we were already working on that we could discuss with pretty much anyone. And
you and I don't remember, we started on the same day.
I always forget that. We totally got caught in the rain that first day so bad.
You, me, and Jess had the same like orientation day and everything, and I'll never forget that first day for a lot of reasons. For me in that job, different people treated that job differently. Other people were more, focused on the public policy and had more of a lobbying, aspect. Some people were like definitely salespeople. And then for me, I always tried to treat it, like I was like teaching, and for better or for worse, whether that was the best thing to do in that job. But yeah, that's how we met. Sorry, yeah.
So just like with what you were saying about with your goals and your career, so would you say that you are pro Sanctuary City? Just out of like kind of a side note.
I mean. Yes and no. I think it's a very complicated thing. So far, I've liked what sanctuary cities are doing. I think it is the right thing for sure for large cities. I think it is a necessity. The best way I like to tackle questions and topics like that is to give some perspective. A lot of people don't think about and put things in perspective and in context. This country, if you really look at, and I don't have a formal degree in criminology or anything like that, or the history of law enforcement, but it's been a passion of mine. This, our country, we are a relatively young country, and so almost everything about our country is a big experiment, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. We're young, we're fresh. We have no idea what's going on.
I mean, and if you put us in the context of empires, which we almost certainly are an empire, almost no empires have gotten, in many different metrics, almost no empires get to where we are, and come out good on the other end. I'm not trying to be fatalistic about that. I'm just saying.
No, it's absolutely real. We've seen it with like pretty much any major empire we've ever seen in the past, like the Mongols. We've seen it with the Romans. Just anything in history.
So to me, I try to have like a positive view of a lot of these things. And to me, if you look at history, you end up having that kind of view, right? Yeah. But I have a lot of privileges that allow me to have that positivity, and I don't blame other people for not. But Justin, our fact checker, can check this for me. But currently, I believe there's more than 18,000 different non-federal law enforcement agencies in the country, which is kind of mind-blowing. And we are fundamentally... Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it is like... And when you're someone like me who wants to like protect people and help people, in this realm... Knowing things like that can be pretty daunting.
Sorry, we got our GIMP over here.
It is. It is live, right? No worries.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So the reason I bring up that is that's just the non-federal law enforcement agencies, and so when you get to talking about something like sanctuary cities, there is a natural given like pull among like what the county surrounding a city wants and what they need, and what a state wants and needs versus what that's the city inside it. I mean, like Austin, Texas, is in the realm of politics, is a blue oasis in a Red Sea, and so if you ask what's happening with Austin being a sanctuary city or Houston being a sanctuary city, compared to, say, a blue state like New York, which has it's just a completely different culture. And so I think sanctuary cities overall, when a city says it's doing that, if it's genuine, not all cities who are sanctuary cities are doing it genuinely.
I think that's a really good point that you just made. That they're not all there.
It's complicated, and I don't want to say, and I want to give people listening to this, a lot of the things that I say and I'm going to say, I am aware that I doubt a recruiter from a law enforcement department is watching this or may even ever see this. But, this is a recording, and we're living in the age of everything you say and do can and will be used against you, right?
Oh, yeah, entirely.
And so like, sanctuary cities that I have been a member of in one way or another, like, hey, pup. Hey, I haven't seen, I think they've been the right decisions, and but I'm also not an expert in it. So, yeah.
So everything that you just said about sanctuary cities, so I did 3 nights at the protest.
Yes.
I had to word it that way.
And I've done none because I can't. Like, to accomplish many of the things that I'm doing, it's too much of a risk for me, and I hope people, understand what I mean by that, right?
Yeah.
So please tell me what you experienced, because I haven't heard from you about that.
Yeah, so I haven't really posted too much about it. I just posted my videos, like anything that I physically recorded. I posted that on Facebook, but I didn't really share all that much about, like, what I witnessed, the things that were a little bit more behind the scenes that you didn't hear on camera, the things that you didn't see in the background, those kinds of things. So I did a Saturday night, Sunday night, and a Monday night, and the Monday night was this past Monday, and I don't remember what day that was. But Saturday night, I just went into Denver, which, for those of you who don't know, is actually a sanctuary city. And I went around the borders of all of the blockades that were around the city and just kind of looked around the edges, particularly the west side and south side of the borders. And there were, like, massive swarms, I guess I would say, of police officers, National Guards, moving inwards, collecting, and also moving towards any vehicles that were getting too close. And there was actually a medical vehicle that stopped literally within 5-10 feet of my car, like literally like slammed on the brakes with a cop car behind them. And they were transporting injured protesters, and they were trying to get out of there, and whoever that police officer was in that vehicle, kudos to them for actually escorting these individuals, making sure they got out safely. It was almost like a clown car, and to a certain degree, like the amount of people that were like coming out of this ambulance that were just injured, limping, bruised, with like bandages or like ice packs and things. And the medics, they all had gas masks, bulletproof vests, and some of them were even as far as armed. On one of the buildings in particular, there were a couple of others that I noticed. I don't want to go as far as saying snipers, but they were definitely heavily armed police officers on higher levels of the buildings that you could see. Sure. And I don't remember exactly what building it was, but there were, all 4 sides of this building had a minimum of 15 police officers per side of ground level outside of the building. Every single one of these police officers had their hand on their hip and just perusing the entire area and just like watching, making sure no one was getting out of hand. I don't know entirely what they were doing at that building, especially because of how far away it was from the Capitol. That was a little bizarre to me. So that was night number 1. Night number 2, I went in. I did a lap around the Capitol building. I managed to get my way into the blockades, and there were people screaming, there were people limping, there were people bleeding. There were, like, I didn't see any looters or anything like that. There weren't, like, people fighting in the streets or anything like that. But there were definitely police officers. If you see the videos on my Facebook, you'll be able to see, I believe in the 20-minute long one, that there is a whole wall of police officers moving inward on one side of the blocks. I ended up taking my route to meet them on the other side of those blocks. they were moving in all protesters from that side with the Capitol building here. For those of you listening to the podcast, you won't have reference. Goodness. Hold on. Operator error. Shit. Oh, well, that's gone. Well,
so it's all audio.
It is all audio now. Operator error. We will try again in the future. But I met the officers on the opposite side. The opposite side of that street that I was on was actually the Capitol building. So I ended up parking right in front. I didn't intentionally mean to park, but there were so much cars in the way that I couldn't actually get through. There were cars completely graffitied. It looked like most of them had done them to their own cars and were stopping in front of the lights and making sure no one could move. Out of nowhere, there were the blasts. What is the flashbangs? And they were shooting rubber bullets. There were people screaming, and people started taking a U-turn from the spot that I was at because there were so many cars blocking the light. We could not move. My car got directly hit with one of the brain fart tear gas. Thank you. I got directly hit with a tear gas can. Like, literally, I heard it ding off my car, and like it was almost complete blackout. Like, there was so much smoke I couldn't see. And I rolled up my windows real fast because someone like yelled like windows down, or masks on, windows up, masks on, windows up. And so I just went ahead and pretty much drove away. I was literally the last car to be able to make a U-turn out of that spot because the police were literally starting to surround my car. They were moving inward. Yeah. And like literally one of them made eye contact with me. Yeah. Like right in like the one spot that I could actually see because of the smoke. Like literally like came in. I was like, crap, like get out of here. And I like got out of there as fast as I could. Yeah. But that was horrific. That was scary. Yeah. And these protesters, they were just protesting. Yeah. Even in the mass mobs, they were being loud, they were yelling, they were screaming. But none of these people at the Capitol, for that entire night that I saw until the police showed up, they were all completely peaceful. Yeah. And I don't want to necessarily go as far to say that the police were the instigators of all of it, but as soon as the police showed up, that's when people started getting hurt. Yeah. So that we'll just go jump right into like further 17 minutes in. We're finally getting into like it's a lot to cover. It's a lot of different background.
The nitty gritty.
Exactly.
Jump back to what you were saying. I can't find any number like you were saying on the number.
Yeah, maybe I mean, Wikipedia, American law enforcement.
Yeah, it says that it's 17,800.
Yeah,
something like that. But it's also it's accompanied with words or whatever that are usually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last. That it's not very dependable. The last. I mean, it's and we'll get to some in a minute to why it is accurate to say that number is ever changing, not because we're constantly adding law enforcement departments to the. I don't know what the right adjective is, to the chagrin, to the maybe disappointment of the defund police people. Every few years, there's this magic thing that happens where we get rid of a law enforcement department in America. One day it exists, and the next day it doesn't. And it's not because, an activist group came in and demanded that the city council, defunds the department. I'll say what it is in a minute. We don't need to fact check that number. Maybe there was a YouTube video that you may try and find where it's a great animated YouTube video that describes the difference between Canadian police and American police. And one of the big differences is that Canada has a nationalized police force. So training, standards, recruitment, all that they have. And when there needs to be a change, like a use of force change, as a country. Even though Canada is, I think, isn't it technically a confederacy? I think it's technically a confederacy.
Fascinating. I did not know that.
I think politically it is. I could be wrong about that. Fact check that. I think despite that, though, like they have a nationalized, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are a nationalized police force system, whereas we have a completely decentralized, like the epitome of a decentralized police force system. Yeah. Even within Colorado, there's hundreds. Or sorry, maybe not hundreds, over 100 local non-federal law enforcement departments, and they're all different, right? Mm-hmm. And even within Denver is its own county and city. There's multiple within it, right? So it's so that's the irony, is that we are not the U.S. is not a confederacy, but we have a totally scatterbrained assortment of law enforcement agencies. In Canada, Confederacy has a nationalized police force. So when they want to enact like a national change, whether it is like the zeitgeist move forward, or like we found a new technology, like what was that example from these? So I mean, like, camera technology is obviously like has been the new changing technology that is changing how the culture and society views policing, right? Everyone can record and see what's going on, what used to be in the shadows. And even 50 years ago in the 1970s, one book I want to reference people, this is what I'm referencing from, is Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. If anybody, I have a list of books and podcasts and things I'd love to recommend if we ever get to that, but the first thing, people, if you care about what we're talking about, the first thing you should go read is Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Starts and ends by talking about Sandra Bland, gets into the details of that. It is amazing, but they talk about in that, they go into the history a lot about law enforcement, and prior to the 1970s, there was almost no research or when I wrote it down, there was like no research or formal knowledge about police tactics, which seems odd, but there was nothing.
To a certain degree, it really isn't, because we're almost retreating back into that same sort of mentality, especially with what's going on with the Minneapolis police department disbanding. I have a friend who is from Central America, only on the internet. We've never met in person. She's really sweet, but she saw in my story that I was posting about the police department being disbanded. She was like, as a not American, what's next? What do you guys do to enforce if you guys don't have police? Like, what happens in cases of domestic violence? What happens in cases of rape? Like, all of these topics. Yeah, and my response to her, I was like, I don't know.
Well,
and neither does like anyone else. It seems like so this is a quote from New York Times. Council members said in interviews on Sunday that they did not have specific plans to announce for what a new public safety system for the city would look like.
That's Sunday as of yesterday. So, I mean, and you and there's a popular author and book going around right now, and the title's very provocative. It's Defund the Police. The author's last name is Vitale or Vitale. I don't know, it's Vitale. I looked at I haven't read it. Haven't gotten that far yet. It's been kind of a whirlwind the last 2 weeks. I read a very in-depth interview that the author did with someone, and even though the title, the topic is Defund the Police, when they went over the details of what they mean by that, the author, Vitale, whatever, used lots of adjectives like redirect funding and reassign officers and assisting officers, and lots of adjectives, none of which are actually defunding the police. And so to me, and I want people to really put this in perspective, and I heard like the Minneapolis 150 organization, when NPR interviewed them last week, and one of the last questions the NPR interviewer asked them was, so what is the answer, what is the non-police answer to current nonviolent crime? Like, there's lots of ways we can prevent future nonviolent crime, right? The economy, improving, getting rid of poverty, homelessness, etc., drugs, blah, 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 right? Lots of things, which I'm in favor of, definitely want to do. But what about current violent crime? And the leader of this Minneapolis 150 group who has done all this research about law enforcement and lack of reforms or whatever, and they had a minute to answer the question, or near enough, and it was just dodging the question. They said, well, we can talk about that, we can go into that later, and blah, 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 which is the exact same type of answer that Republicans give and Trump gives about healthcare. Oh, on day one, I'm going to repeal Obamacare, and everyone's like, it's going to be something better, and we're like, okay, what is it? Is it Medicare for all? Is it like socialized medicine? Is it single payer? All of which are better than Obamacare. And the answer is, oh, no, just trust us. Just trust us. We'll have it. Everyone will be insured. But it's going to be private, right? And there is no such system, right? Like, literally, the best non-socialized type of healthcare insurance model is Romney Care, which is now Mitt Romney Care, who was the governor of Massachusetts when it was first tried, which is now Obamacare, right? That it was from the Heritage Foundation conservative plan. Obama took it on thinking the conservatives surely wouldn't go against their own idea. For the first black president, of course they would. Yeah. and right now, the people who are saying they want to defund the police sound like libertarians that say, hey, we want to get rid of government completely, and it's never been tried in modern history, and they're like, well, what's going to be the alternative? And they're like, trust us, it'll work. That's what it sounds like right now.
Honestly, what it sounds like to me is either a little bit like Elizabeth Warren or a little bit like Marxism. Both of them, brilliant ideas, no follow-up. And when you have a gap, mm-hmm. there are so many people that fall through the cracks.
Well, let me ask you...
So many people that fall through the cracks. There's programs like No Children Left Behind, like even Black Lives Matter. Let's go as far as that.
Great
All
idea.
of these different things that will completely fall through the cracks.
Well, let me ask you this as a domestic violence survivor. Mm-hmm. This is one theory that I have that terrifies me. Not just as someone that's trying to go into this profession and wants to devote my career to it, but caring about people like you. And I listened to your episode on it, and I'm proud of you for that, by the way.
Thank you. I was actually thinking about deleting that, but that will make me keep that up.
No, I think you should absolutely keep it up. But with the context of domestic violence and sexual assault survivors and that kind of stuff, to me, because they don't have a specific, like, for example, I want to they're saying we're going to have these new public safety officials instead of police who are going to handle violent crime. Okay, show me a job description. If it is better than a police officer, I will sign up. I haven't gotten a law enforcement job yet, so I'm not I'm not really invested in it. I'm not on their team or whatever.
You're on the team of safety and well-being.
If there is a different way to do it, show me the job description. Let me apply. I'm ready, but they don't have it. And so what I'm worried is they know that there's going to be injuries, death, chaos, suffering in the wake of trying to figure out what to do next. And what's going to happen is they know that, we have 400 million guns. You can fact check this. 400 million guns, or near enough, in the United States, and we don't know where most of those are. How are these new public safety officials going to deal with that in Minneapolis, right? They can't put up a wall around the city to keep out more guns and gun violence. So what are they going to do, right? And so I'm worried that they are doing this new social experiment with great intentions at the expense of people who are going to be sexually assaulted, people who are going to be attacked, people who are going to have their businesses that minority-owned businesses, which are very difficult to start. My parents have helped people get into those in Jackson, Mississippi, and it's very difficult. And the idea that in the wake of this, or in the experimentation of this, that people can try something daring and see their life savings and all that they've risked go to waste immediately, terrifies me. And I can see what this is not conspiratorial. I can see them saying, getting rid of the police department first, but not doing anything about guns. And then we have all this new gun violence in Minneapolis, and them saying, "Well, see, we need to ban guns." But the problem is Minneapolis isn't an island.
Yep.
And so, I hear people say, "I can't wait for we're going to defund Minneapolis, and it's going to ripple around the country." Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but
it's really not going to work that way. And I looked directly on the Minneapolis Police Department webpage. Actually, I think it was either late last night or early this morning. Actually, I think it was early this morning. And literally, their website has a phone number to the nearest police department if you need assistance. Okay. And the comment underneath of that phone number says, "This is like calling 911." But in my mind was, in a little parentheses, comma, but way more complicated, and what if people don't have that number?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's one number that could cause life
Yes.
or death.
Well, so-
Like, no doubt about it.
Let me blow your minds here. And there were some articles written about this a few years ago. I'm going to point you, Justin, to one of these. Put in Atlantic, just these 3 words in the search term, or maybe The Atlantic. It's from the Atlantic magazine. The Atlantic, police, insurance. Right? And the thing is, there's this, and like I said earlier, there's this amazing thing that happens every few years in America where a police department exists one day and then it doesn't the next. Or a police department is about to not exist and it makes dramatic reforms and changes. And the question is how is this possible? Did Sean King come in with his social media, followers and change it? No, not in the least. It actually, and actually, I want to get her name right. Debbie Ramirez, I believe, is the Northeastern University who was on NPR yesterday. She has studied this and writes about it and was on NPR talking about it. But it's the insurance industry. If a doctor, let me ask you all this, the two of you this. If a doctor messes up, what do you get to do?
I wouldn't have a damn idea.
Well, no, sorry. It's meant to be a little. You get to sue them, and the question is that doctor has malpractice insurance. Even I believe in the state of Colorado, hairdressers and barbers have professional liability insurance for each of them. It's not like the barbershop has just a barbershop insurance.
Oh yeah,
right.
My hairdresser actually last Thursday was telling me about the difference between the amount of training he has to go through to become a barber versus the amount of training that a police officer has to go through, which is
that's a little
very significant. Actually,
I agree and disagree with that. That's a little bit of a. I'm not trying to debate.
Broken down to an hourly basis. It's significant.
Well, yes, let's look at that. Well, yeah, no, I'd love to explain to people who haven't been through the application process and seen what it is. I've seen that thrown around on social media a lot.
Mm-hmm. It's intensive. I will give it that. Like
no. What's misleading is that the academy, just the police academy, yes, is often less than almost every other profession. But after the police academy, you go right into field training, which, depending on the department, is a year to 2 years. And you are, and the details of that, you are under supervision the entire time. It depends on the department and the state, what the state requires. But the training, what is real law enforcement training is, so what people are throwing around when they're talking about that is a little misleading and not entirely fair. But what I'm getting, but one big difference that is irrefutable is that there are no individual officers in the country that have their own individual professional liability insurance. But yeah. Did you find the article?
I did. And to go down the queue real quick, we have over 393.3 million guns in the U.S. And to give you perspective, we have let me get back to the tab. 328.2 million people in the U.S.
Yeah. So there's enough guns for all the babies, right? Is what's scary. Yeah. So and there's another statistic that's in light of that's thrown around where everyone's like, they were talking about this on 538 podcast, Nate Silver's podcast. One of the people on said, "Oh, I think we're all finding that the state has a monopoly on violence." They don't. If you take the federal military and the federal agencies away, the local states are absolutely outgunned by the citizens, and people, when they're looking at police and the relationship with the public, local law enforcement, that's what they're seeing, right? Mm-hmm. They can't and don't count on the federal government coming in because the federal government have not always been very good, fair actors and dependable actors, right? You look at when the federal government has come in to intervene in the states. They came in my alma mater at Ole Miss to help James Meredith, be the first black man on that campus. Kennedy sent the National Guard. The girls in Arkansas to go to school. Johnson, I think, sent the military in to integrate that school. But you also have federal debacles like Waco, Texas, and the Branch Davidians that were burned in their church or lit themselves on fire. We don't know. Right? And so there's things like that are misleading. The article that I was trying to get Justin to look up, it goes into detail about how the insurance companies in these small towns don't have the budget to insure their own police department, right? So they have private insurers. And the private insurers can come in and say, if there's enough police corruption, enough civil lawsuits, because that's mostly victims of police violence, brutality, misconduct, they mostly get justice or whatever it could be equivalent to that in civil court, right? Because of qualified immunity, there's very little in criminal court that can happen to officers with the way Supreme Court rulings and the laws are.
For those of our listeners who don't know, would you want to go into depth a little bit about what qualified immunity is?
I mean, I don't know if y'all were at the presentation. I did a 2-part presentation, and in that the office that we both worked in, where I discussed one of the more prominent Supreme Court cases on use of force, which was Graham v. Connor. It is Radio Lab podcast has an episode about it, which is
Radio Lab.
If you love Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they have the best episode on that. So go listen to that first, and then go listen to a slightly heavier episode on Graham v. Connor. By the way, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for all you know, she is so genius that she pioneered gender rights in the Supreme Court by bringing a men's rights case to the Supreme Court. Trojan horsed it. So, and oh God, we're going so many segues. With that in mind, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg saw that female gender rights cases were not getting to the Supreme Court. They just didn't want to listen to it, and the Supreme Court can do that, right? They can refuse not to hear a case.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, I don't think they can listen to every case, but
no.
But so she basically said,
I got my own issues with the whole.
So but the reason I'm bringing this up is she said, okay, you don't want to hear about women's rights being violated. How about this one case in, I think, Wisconsin, where men couldn't buy alcohol at a certain age, but women could at the same age, right? So she's like, that's against men's rights. Gender rights matter, and by the way, so do women's rights. That works. Here in Colorado, I could be getting this slightly wrong, but quotas, law enforcement quotas, which are still being used as far as I know in New York City. Again, big difference between that department and what's going on here, right? 18,000 departments, all have racism to deal with, all dealing with it in many different ways. But in Colorado, we have no quotas here. Not because the public saw that quotas in law enforcement are immoral, which they are, but because the union here, the local union, said quotas put our officers in danger, and we don't want them. Which is not the first reason you should get rid of quotas, but the way to get rid of it, and that benefits everybody. And so,
it's definitely a really good thought that I'm sure a lot of people.
Yeah, and so when I brought up the insurance thing because I'd like to give people who are listening to this or watching this some hope, right? Marietta, California, I think is the city that was the department was completely reformed, from the brink of dying. Other department, and they did it through the pressure of the insurance company. The insurance company said, too much corruption, terrible police officers, violating people's rights, killing people, harming people, molestations, all kinds of terrible stuff. Put that department through the ringer and totally reformed it, I believe is what the article goes into.
It also says that they went through $2 million worth of settlements in a 5-year period.
Which is for a small town, which
1,400 people,
for Minneapolis, that's nothing, right? And the taxpayers are the ones paying, I believe the taxpayers end up kind of being the insurer for big cities, right? But I don't know for sure. I don't want to be totally quoted on that. But but there are plenty of small towns around the U.S. that didn't have the insurance company come in and put that pressure on there, right? The insurance company in many of these small towns is like the Achilles heel, and they have that. And Debbie Ramirez brought up the idea, it's not the only solution, but it is But the reason why the reason why a lot of the activists right now are not thinking about it, not pushing for it, is because it is technically, at least, a private sector idea. If you don't have experience in insurance or a business degree, or you don't know the ins and outs of that, you might not think of that. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just not thinking of it because they're community activists. They're teachers. They're local politicians. Right. But if you think about it, Why is it that a barber in the pandemic, like, is not going to people's houses and cutting people's hair because if someone finds out, they lose their license and they have to pay a bunch of money and their insurance gets messed up. So they have that own system that prevents the public from harm. Officers don't have that. And for law enforcement department watching this, I'm not saying you should have that or every officer should have it, but if you want to hire me, I'd be okay with it. I'm not saying you should have a body camera or require your officers to wear body cameras, but if you hire me, I'm not afraid to wear a body camera, right? So I
don't feel like any officer should have any concern with that
kind
of thing. There is something that I can think of that would definitely cause that to be the split-second decision-making. There are mistakes that can be made, for sure, that can... So, that just like in the sake of qualified immunity, if that's completely stripped... We have 4 minutes left on this one, so we're going to probably make a part 2 like right after this.
Qualified immunity is really complicated, and there's a lot of Supreme Court cases that have built it up to where it is now. Graham v. Connor was just the beginning of them. That's my answer to that, basically. So, yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, even, like, with citizens' concerns about it and everything like that is, like, the split-second decision-making. Yeah. So, like, without qualified immunity, these police officers, if they make a mistake, they will be held 100% liable for the mistake that they make. That is not fair, given the job that they have. Like, that would be, in my mind, very similar to charging, like, a 19-year-old kid who's in the Army for whatever is done there, because that's what his job entails if it was an accident. I can see that, but I don't know how that would work at the end of the day.
So I can give you an example of why the system has built up from my perspective as a teacher. As far as I know, most of the teachers' unions in the country are very much against cameras in the classroom, which is akin to body cameras, right? And I was a teacher, and I've always liked the idea of cameras in the classroom. And I remember arguing with a teacher, former friend in Mississippi, before I went to Korea about this. She's now a top teacher. This will give you some perspective. She's a top teacher, and I believe still against cameras in the classroom. And that's and the reason teachers don't want cameras in the classroom. Usually, the mindset is we don't trust parents and the community to treat us fairly if they saw what really happens in classrooms. And I was in a situation in Korea my last year where they put me in a 500 square foot classroom over the course of 2 days and 2 day increments. 120 plus students are going to come through my classroom. Most of these students, barely learning English, no Korean co-teacher, 2 small windows that my principals wanted to cover up so that the parents couldn't look in. And I'm like, for my student safety, for my safety, and for my career's security, I want a camera. And I demanded a camera. And it blows my mind that, like, I see the professions, like, seeing those as the same thing. What they ultimately don't is they don't trust the public to treat them fairly if they really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, even what I was saying about, like, the protest videos, there was a lot happening behind the scenes, sounds and, like, visuals that I had that the camera certainly did not. So we only have 1 minute and 30 seconds on this one, so I'm going to end this one. You guys who are listening right now, go ahead and jump onto part 2 right now. If you want to get a little bit deeper into qualified immunity, we will continue this on part 2. I look forward to seeing you guys over there. Hope you guys are proud of who you were today.